Good afternoon, and welcome to the Department of Medicine's Grand Rounds. Please take a moment to silence your pagers and mobile devices. Grand Rounds next week will be our monthly CPC presented by Dr. Sung Lee. Today, we will be having an Institute for Clinical and Translational Research talk presented by Dr. Paul Harris, Professor of Biomedical Informatics and Research Professor of Biomedical Engineering at Vanderbilt University School of Medicine. Dr. Harris received his undergraduate degree in mechanical engineering from Tennessee Technological University prior to receiving a master's and PhD in biomechanical engineering from Vanderbilt University. He now serves as the director for the Vanderbilt Office of Research Informatics, and in this capacity oversees research data warehousing, data and information management platforms, patient recruitment services, and other enterprise-wide informatics resources. He is active in large-scale international collaboration efforts and leads numerous technology dissemination projects, including REDCap, Research Match, and IRB Reliance Exchange. Dr. Harris also currently serves as the PI for the NIH NCATS Recruitment Innovation Center and co-director of technology innovation for one of 3 NIH NCATS Trial Innovation Centers. Speaking to us today on designing platforms and service models to support research teams, please join me in welcoming Dr. Harris to the podium.
So thanks for that fabulous introduction. Sorry, I've got to make sure I can. I'm pretty good at informatics, just not so good at PowerPoint. So. Perfect. Okay. So thanks to each of you for being here. It's a great honor to be here at the University of Maryland. It's especially a great honor to be here with Steve Davis. Dr. Davis, when I first came to Vanderbilt in the late 90s, Dr. Davis was kind enough to allow me to collaborate with his team there. And a lot of the work, I was thinking about this on the plane ride up yesterday, a lot of the work that you'll see today are from lessons learned from those early collaborations. So thanks for that, and thanks for this kind invitation. So the other thing I want to say is congratulations. I've been very yeah. Let's do that. So this is huge, and very welcome news to many in the CTSA organization. And I was looking around after talking to some of the faculty and staff last night, just looking around last night and this morning about what you've already accomplished with ICTR. Are we calling that ICTR here, or okay, with ICTR here? And it's really quite impressive. So congratulations. So the talk that I've assembled today is called Power to the People, but you'll also see that later on it's going to be power from the people. In my role at Vanderbilt, we started my office about 2006, and very much like here, we started it around this notion that as we looked at the research enterprise at Vanderbilt, and we looked at a place that was pretty strong in informatics, we looked at the gaps that existed, and we decided whether or not we get one of these CTSA grants or not, there are some real gaps here. And so we started this Office of Research Informatics with really about 2 people initially, but once we got some grant funding, we kind of grew, and we continue to grow, getting program grants and doing project type work. And we're about 50 folks now on the staff side. But I guess a central premise to anything that we do is if we wake up in the morning and we can think about generalizable problems for any type of research, clinical and translational research, where informatics should be playing a role, where if you wake up next Tuesday and you have a problem and informatics could play a role in solving that, but it's not, that's kind of fair game to think about. So it's a really fun place. It's a place where we can innovate quite a bit. But at the end of the day, success or failure depends on people actually doing things. So it's that's the charge. So one of the first areas that we focused on was this ecosystem of big data. What are we going to do at Vanderbilt with big data? We'd been in the business of clinical informatics for a long time at Vanderbilt, since the early 90s. But again, when we asked the researchers, what do you need to do that you can't do? there was a lot of people saying, we need access to that data for research purposes and for recruitment and all types of different scenarios. So we realized that our current ecosystem at Vanderbilt around big data was the electronic data warehouse team, and they were very focused on things like financial reporting, all very, very important things, but it wasn't serving the research enterprise. So we decided, we need to look at this from a research data warehousing standpoint. Vanderbilt at the time, we're a little less so now because we went to Epic last year, but at the time, our electronic health record system was really systems. A lot of information sort of feeding together right at the point of care to be the patient electronic health record. But a lot of this information was coming from a lot of systems. So we figured out what those systems are. We figured out the data assets that we needed to provide support for the research enterprise. And then we set about building pipes to those data sources. Before that, you could do it, but it was one project at a time. And you had to sort of know the right people to get it done. So what we wanted to do was sort of blow that model up and put something much more generalizable in place. We started with de-identified, which was quite tricky. But the reason we started with de-identified was because we also wanted to form a big, large-scale DNA data bank that I'll tell you about in just a moment. So that large-scale de-identified biosample repository paired with the phenotype information in the de-identified electronic health record, that's all called BioView at Vanderbilt. And just the data piece of that is called the synthetic derivative. Date shifting, you can look, you can find records, you can use it for retrospective analysis and prognosis, but we can't re-identify it. So we built that first, and then we built the identified piece, because there are problems that you just can't deal with: ambiguity of date shifting, seasonality studies. There are problems, generalizable problems, where you just can't deal with not being able to identify patient recruitment and that sort of thing. But that's sort of the history of our process. And then sort of along the lines, the D box there is really sort of recognizing that you don't build one of these things without some deep experience. And so going out and finding the right person on the cybersecurity side or the privacy side or the natural language processing side, that was an approach that we took. And it's kind of a synergistic relationship where having access to a resource like this helps them in their methods research and their career and growing fellows and so forth. But we also needed that expertise locally so that we could build the infrastructure that we needed for everyone. Now, this is a reminder to me to tell you that I have seen so many CTSA grants go in over the years where the big idea was this. I think we're past this now. But the big idea was this. And honestly, if we're thinking about serving the research enterprise, if we stop at just that circle, what have we really accomplished? Not much, right? So our job is to make that to democratize access, so that whether you're the dean of medicine, or whether you're the junior faculty member from nephrology that just walked in the door, there's something for you, and we're gonna help you with that. I won't spend a lot of time on this sort of E arrow here, but that's sort of a recognition that once we had this sort of infrastructure built on the research side of things, it's a pretty short hop to being able to sort of use that same data, the same predictive models, to go back into the clinical system. So that newspaper there is from a program called Predict that came about maybe 5-6 years ago, where we were doing proactive DNA sampling on folks as they were predicted to be taking a certain med soon, so that we could basically sort of start the precision medicine components of our clinical enterprise. And I think since then we've done a lot of work in the learning healthcare system. So again, this is sort of just a recognition that sort of building the infrastructure doesn't only help the research enterprise, but it can also and should feed back into the clinical enterprise. But I would say where I wake up in the morning most is thinking about this work on the far right. How do we make these data, these services, discoverability, et cetera, accessible to the research community. And I would say that there's two main thoughts there. One is to promote discovery, so for hypothesis generation. The other one is to promote efficiency. That's where it gets interesting. So I'm not going to explain in detail the rest of these slides. I'm going to go pretty quick until we get some that are much less tedious than this one. But I did want to sort of pull this one out, and we were talking about BioView a moment ago. We've got about 250,000 de-identified samples in our de-identified data bank called BioView. We can pair those up with EHR records from our 3 million patients that are in the system, and that can really facilitate good research, even if you're the junior faculty member from nephrology. But you will recognize, as I do and we did, that all of that's not going to happen without process. And so putting process and coordination around data assets as well as biosamples and so forth, that's key to doing it right and doing it at scale. This is, again, sort of a process document. These are all available on our version of the ICTR website on, where do you go and how do you get access to data? How do you get access to services? We try very hard, and I think this is coming up in the next slide, we try very hard to keep everything possible free. But you can't do everything for free. And so like you guys, we have a voucher program, and that can feed into core services like you see here, where we're sort of looking at the decision logic for getting BioView samples out. This is sort of the slide that sort of shows the concept that we do have a lot of assets here. Like I said, almost 250,000 DNA samples. Records from about 3 million folks with longitudinal records on about 1 million of those. And again, if we stop there, it's sort of just that big circle, right? So our philosophy is really to build front-end tools for the discoverability piece of it. We've worked with the compliance office, we've worked with privacy, we've worked with the IRB. We've been able to sort of stand up things like you see in the top right corner, these cohort identification tools that would allow you, to wake up at 2 a.m. and go look up, what does the landscape look like here in lupus and, people that have taken this class of drug, et cetera. Well, that might be for hypothesis generation. It might be feasibility. I think we can do this trial at Vanderbilt. So those are things that can happen, immediately without additional IRB approval because they're just counts. But then, as we go into sort of the layered access, being able to show records and review those de-identified or identified, we just kind of layer on process there. Anytime we're building, we're trying as hard as we can, again, to sort of build tools that are free or that cost average out to very little. We also recognize that point-and-click tools are almost never going to be the end-all answer for everything. And so like some of your teams here, we've built recharge cores so that, the same individuals that built those data pipes that are handling the data transformations and putting it all over here in that big circle, that those programmers can be employed, on a project-by-project basis with funding or vouchers, et cetera, to be able to sort of go do the hard stuff. The really nice thing about that is, our philosophy is do those one-offs, but every time you see something that's interesting and it pops up multiple times, well, that's a good target for maybe building that into the tool side of things. The other thing I sort of wanted to point out here is that building the, in the big data ecosystem, building the all-in-all architecture and the data pipelines and getting the data moved here is not the answer. In addition, sort of building these services and tools on top, that gets you a lot farther along, but unless people know about it, it's still not going to be used. So we spend a lot of time at Vanderbilt putting on seminars, putting on training exercises, so that people know what we're doing. And again, I've seen your ICTR website. I think that's part of the cultural framework here as well. But it's really, really important. Especially when we get into, I'll talk about REDCap in just a few moments, and we do these routine what's new and what's next. So you may think you know what REDCap does, or you may think you know what these tools that we've been developing in the big data space do, but unless you've seen it in the last 6 months, you might have missed something. So that continuous refresh of giving talks and making our team accessible. I think this is just this is just sort of a reiteration that tools with programmers seem to be the sweet spot for us. And I think especially saying yes to everyone is only achievable for that chargeback core. I recognize that one day I was sitting across the conference table from an acting chair of research for cardiology. And the guy asked me this really, really simple question. He said, I know we were talking about the big data space. I know that the data exists, and I know that it's structured because I know how it's going into the electronic record. Tell me who to pay to get this done. And I had to, as the director of the Office of Research Informatics, I had to sit there and say, I don't know who you pay. Because it was before we had built a lot of this infrastructure that I just mentioned. But that conversation and my kicking rocks on the way back to my office and regretting having to say that really was my driver for there has to be a way. And so that sort of led us to build the recharge core that I mentioned earlier. So, I think if we're thinking about sort of guiding principles for building generalizable services and democratizing access to everyone in the big data space, I think I didn't mention this, but before we built anything, there were a lot of conversations with the Privacy Office. There were a lot of conversations with the IRB. There were a lot of conversations with community engagement groups, just sort of seeing, are we building something that is going to be palatable by all? And so getting that and getting that trust early, and then keeping that trust is huge. I mentioned the last mile utilization methods, promoting awareness. I think really I've covered everything except for number 6 there. Anytime I'm asking the institution to invest in either the blocking and tackling to get those EDW folks out of the way so I can go do my job, or I need some additional resources so that I can do my job, I always sort of carry with me that every month I have a meeting with the equivalent of Dr. Davis here, and we're going to meet and talk about where I'm headed next and what I need. But also I'm very quick in those meetings to say, okay, this is where we're seeing the payoff. So instrumenting the model with the ability to go and know very quickly which publications are resulting on this work, which grants are resulting from this work, and again maybe anecdotes about a faculty member that said, hey, I actually came here because you have this sort of ecosystem already in place. Staying a little bit longer on the big data side of things, just sort of the payoff. Again, one of the returns on investment is it's really allowed us to do some more interesting things that go outside of Vanderbilt. So we've been involved as one of the inaugural sites in the coordinating center on the eMERGE network, which is all about leveraging EHR data and genomic information to do science in different ways from the beginning, and that's a big part of who we are. We recently joined the ACT network, which is a CTSA network of sites that sign governance agreements so that that data can be reported on in an aggregate, de-identified way across multiple institutions. Again, there are a number of use cases that might be interesting there. One of those might be, helping pick sites for multi-site trials and the likes, as well as hypothesis generation. PCORNet, who you're familiar with, and most recently, my team has been awarded a grant along with my colleague Consuelo Wilkins, who's a community engagement expert, to lead some of the trial innovation network work, particularly around recruitment innovation. This is just a slide showing one of our low-tech models to be able to sort of go out with phenotype requests to any institution in the CTSA network, and then pull together counts. And again, it's low-tech in that the ask is pretty low-tech. We define the phenotyping algorithms based on our tools, bouncing against the ACT network tools, et cetera, and then rely on the fact that other institutions probably have one or multiple versions of those tools as well. So that plus a lot of information about sort of site readiness and interest becomes sort of an expression of interest for trials coming into the Trial Innovation Center. But again, I don't think we would have been able to build that without building the earlier work, and so that's why I include it here. And then finally, the All of Us program. I think because a number of reasons, we were including the PI who's Josh Denny at Vanderbilt, who did a lot of upfront formative work on the All of Us program. We are the research and data core for the All of Us program. And so as part of that, we're building a lot of tools for that program. But again, the nice thing is we're sort of bouncing against experience at Vanderbilt on what really goes through the researcher's mind when they're doing phenotyping, when they're doing cohort assessments, and how might we scale that up to many institutions sharing data for this common purpose of the All of Us program. So I won't spend a lot of time there because I want to get on to other topics, but if anybody's interested in that one, it's quite fascinating work. And I was up in Boston last week and driving back to the airport with some folks from my team. We passed Framingham, and I think every large program I've ever worked with said we're going to be the next Framingham. I honestly think that this one has the potential to be the next Framingham. If it works, it's very ambitious, but if it works and it's done well, I think it really can change the landscape of research. So I think lessons learned there in sort of sharing and sort of extending out to networks, because you have the capacity to do this locally. Recognize that data may open doors for collaboration. Being involved in multiple collaborative networks is not free. Most of them don't have the same data model. So it's basically taking those data pipes that I mentioned, and we'll have a set of data over here that's been transformed for the ACT network and those tools, and another one over here for the eMERGE network. And so it's not cheap. It's not free. It's much cheaper than sort of having to build it one at a time, but recognize that there are costs. And then again, change control is really crucial for really anything that you build to maintain. But I think especially when you're dealing with multiple networks and multiple meanings of data that can be coming in. So now I want to sort of pivot to power to the people in prospective data. And in actuality, I've kind of flipped the order of these things. My real early work was in the REDCap space, and I kind of evolved into the larger role that I mentioned earlier. But my first real research interest was sort of recognizing that you don't really get much more generalizable than the need to collect and maintain quality data for studies. That's true in autism, it's true in Parkinson's, it's true in zebrafish, right? So basically, in my early career, I'm an engineer by training rather than an informatician, but I realized that more and more I'm getting called on to sort of help people figure out the data management pieces. And this was about the time that HIPAA security was coming online. So we were all good at not talking about patients in elevators, but the HIPAA security rules, and that's privacy, but the HIPAA security rules said, hey, if you're going to be collecting electronic data, then you better have audit trails, you better have all of these policies and procedures in place, which in hindsight, it's ridiculous that we weren't doing that already. But in 2004, looking across the landscape at Vanderbilt, we were woefully unprepared for this, and most people were collecting data in Excel or SPSS or the best ones were in Microsoft Access, and those are all great tools. but they weren't going to satisfy this need for HIPAA security. So we realized, we've got to do something better, and that was sort of the genesis behind REDCap. And I don't have slides here. I'm going to pivot more into the what's going on now and what's next, because I know you have REDCap here, and I know you have good support for that here. But really, it was sort of an exercise in building just enough. Let's focus on data capture first, and then and then talk some people into using it here, because this is scary. They used to be able to control their own domain here with Excel or whatever, and I'm asking them to put it basically in the cloud. First question that comes back is, what do you think? First question is, if I'm talking to a research investigator, and I'm saying, hey, you should use this REDCap because it does, look how easy it is. It's all in the cloud. It's all backed up. You don't have to worry about it. You don't know about this HIPAA security stuff, but it's really going to impact you. So I promise you'll thank me later when the IRB asks. What do you think the first question I got back was? Anybody? First question was, what if you get hit by a bus? And it was Mike Steen, Mike. And Mike's a great guy, and I consider Mike a good friend, but Mike really wasn't worried about me getting hit by a bus. What he was really worried about is, what happens to my data if you get hit by a bus, right? So I'm trusting you here. So that conversation sort of led us to build out an export piece. Then I could tell Mike Steen, well, if I get hit by a bus, you say a few nice words about me, and then you go and click this button, and you get your data out, and it's all pristine. And by the way, if you change your mind, worst case is you invest in this, you don't like it, you can always go back to Excel, just click that button and export it. And that's an important conversation, and it's an important paradigm, and we'll talk about it in a bit, in sort of empowering the other way. I was trying to solve this problem of HIPAA security and sleeping well at night as the institution, knowing that our research teams had an easy way to do the right thing. Our researchers were telling us it's not enough. Hey, will it do this? That's great, but can you get it to do this? So that's really the secret sauce of REDCap. It's listening to end users and then trying to figure out, hey, I've heard that 5 times, and we should figure out a way to make life easier there. So we have a large and active community of users. It's about 56,000 projects now. I should say, and you can see from our dashboard. Remember I said earlier that I need to go to my boss once a month and say, this is what we're doing, this is why this is important. Yeah, eventually my programmers get tired of answering that every month, and they just build dashboards like the ones that you see. And then we, in the case of REDCap, we just punch them into REDCap so that you have them too. But this is one of the sort of the back-end reports in REDCap. You can see that even though we have 56,000 projects, only about 21,000 of them right now are in production. The other one might be in test mode, or they might be in archive mode. The study's already over. And you can see, especially in the project types, down in the project purpose with research, they're not all clinical and translational research. They're not all research. So our philosophy at Vanderbilt is, really, if you're a student, if you're a staff member or a faculty member, if you can figure out how to do what you need to do in REDCap, it's free. And we want to get out of your way and let you do that. We do have some training mechanisms, much like you do here with ICTR, where we can do some additional hand-holding. We even have a recharge core where we can build onto REDCap if you need to. But for the rank and file, again, going back to that democratization of access, you can, literally, I've had people tell me that they designed a multi-site clinical trial, data instruments, and had it ready to socialize with the sponsor over a weekend. And this was a physician, not an informatician. So building it and then getting out of the way, other than listening for what do they need next, is a big principle of ours. I usually include the slide, the graphs over on the left, to show that at any time during the day or night, people are using our version of REDCap at Vanderbilt, and they're all over the place. So we do a lot of multi-site trials. We don't really have 26,000 people that work at Vanderbilt, which is in our active user piece. But it is important, because we have shared this out with lots of institutions. It is important to note that the metrics here are just on our one Vanderbilt install, not everyone's. So I kind of mentioned this principle. In the earliest days of REDCap, I really did meet with every single group that came along, and it was a sales pitch. I mean, I had it down to, I guarantee you could have woken me up from a deep sleep at 2 a.m. and started me with a sentence like, and it's got HIPAA security principles in it, and I could have finished that spiel for you. Eventually that didn't scale, and I needed to spend more time programming and doing other things, and so I hired somebody else to do the same thing. And then we hired somebody else, and then finally we got smart, and the awareness at Vanderbilt was enough that we didn't need to do them one at a time anymore. We instead have these clinics where people kind of bring us problems, and we have these ninjas that sit around the table and collectively answer questions. But still, I would say the power of REDCap is down in the bottom right. That's great, but will it do this? Otherwise, we'd just be guessing on what people need. As a result of listening, we've gone from data capture to data exporting in different stats packages to all kinds of different things you can see here and more. And again, the last several minutes of my talk, I want to kind of get into the cutting edge stuff, what's brand new there and what might be interesting to you. But I do think it's important to note that, for any given study, I don't think I've ever seen a study that wanted every single module turned on for their study. If you're doing a randomized clinical trial, randomization might be something that you want to put in place. If you're using this for chart reviews or some other reason, then you probably won't want to use that module. And really, the hardest thing about REDCap, I think, is making it easy for easy stuff. And adding complexity if you need it, because again, we don't meet with all of these folks. We just rely on them to kind of figure it out. So that choice architecture of setting up studies, we want it to be super simple. We did start sharing it about a year and a half later. The story behind sharing it, I'd love to say that way back in the early days I had this epiphany and we're gonna do this by 2016. It was a bit of an accident, and somebody coming to me and saying, "Hey, we need this at our institution," and then me saying, "Yeah, but we'll give it to you, but it'll take a bit of time to de-Vanderbilt it. So I want some of your effort in return." That was the first collaboration. It was with the University of Puerto Rico, and again, I won't go into each of the rest of the stories there, but we sort of grew that consortium slowly. But I think the real value piece of that is it's always been sort of you get something, and we don't ask for programmers anymore. But I think there is still very much a volunteer community around the institutions that are supporting and using REDCap. And again, that's the other secret sauce of REDCap. But now we're in about 3,200 institutions across 129 countries, and you can see the other statistics there, including ICTR. I was really... several of us went to dinner last night, and I was in multiple conversations, and I was always lamenting the fact that I could hear over on my right, I think Scott Carey and maybe Megan were talking about some interesting use cases in REDCap. So I missed some of those because I was talking to some people on my left. But I know that you've got a really good group here, and I know that you're doing some interesting stuff with REDCap here, and I thank you. So I think usually after I sort of show those numbers, I usually sort of point out the fact that numbers are nice. This is nice to show my boss. But really the so what factor of it is not that. The so what factor is the empowering of science. And again, we sort of lucky. I realized early on if I could write a methods paper on REDCap, and then if I could get people to cite that paper, I get a lot of the metrics collection done for me. And so we wrote a little methods blurb and said, hey, if you're publishing, tied it right to that export feature. So hey, if you're publishing right now and you don't mind, just go ahead and cite this, and here's the narrative that you can put into your methods paper. And so this is conservative. I don't think everyone cites this, but we've had at least as of this week, we've got at least 6,400 citations, and you can kind of see one of those bibliometric analyses down in those colorful boxes that really sort of points out the diversity of use. And again, that's That's all on the users. That's smart people using flexible tools to do what they need to do. The other one is, of course, the 870,000 end users. And while we certainly can't have those one-on-one conversations with everyone, we have found that the consortium of REDCap folks having the conversations with everyone, it's pretty useful in terms of bringing information back to us. I put a paper out on the REDCap consortium. It's under review right now in the Journal of Biomedical Informatics, but it's part of my graphical abstract. I put this together in December, and I think it's actually a pretty good representation of how REDCap works. And so over on the left, in the blue circle, that's our development team at Vanderbilt. You know, we build it, we test it, we disseminate it, we give it away to any academic, nonprofit, or government organization. Then, you know, it's up to that group to set it up and figure out how you're going to train your users and democratize access, give it away or charge for it, whatever you want to do. But there's sort of that learning, training, support model. Then the researchers at the institution use it. And again, those suggestions come back to us, usually through the REDCap consortium members. We listen to those and we figure out, hey, can we do that? It's a great idea, but can I get funding to support the development of that right now? And you know, there's a lot of decisions in that, but I do think it's really a nice model, and it's kind of borne out well. Again, largely because of the end users and the volunteerism of the REDCap consortium. So here's the new stuff. Actually, this is not a new question. Probably the third interview that I had with researchers at Vanderbilt back in 2004, this question came up. This is great. Can it get data out of the electronic health record? And remember, my story's flipped here, right? So we did REDCap first, and then we did the big data stuff. So the answer was, well, of course not. That's way too hard. And really, you know, if you think about it, that is a really hard problem. REDCap, and especially with REDCap, right? REDCap is a wild west. If you talk to informaticians and standards experts, REDCap is really good for that randomized clinical trial and getting those labs in and structuring just the way you want. Or you can also have REDCap set up over here for your lab pizza party. Who wants pepperoni? And you know, it doesn't care what you're collecting, right? So it is the Wild West in terms of you define whatever you want for your project. So that works well in the general. But if you're talking about connecting it to a very structured system like the electronic health record, that gets tricky. You know, the mapping is trivial. So what do you call a glucose over in the electronic health record? You know, dirty little secret is, and most of you that are clinicians know this, but a lot of informaticians don't sort of clue in until later, is there 45 different flavors of that in the EHR, right? So which one of those do you want mapped to which one of your glucoses over here in your REDCap? Transformations. So I want gender. Great. Seems pretty easy, male, female, you know, different categories there. But maybe the EHR codes those as M's and F's, and your REDCap case report forms code them as 1s and 0s. So transformations. And a number of different things, including lack of standardization across implementations of EHRs. EHR teams are really busy, and they don't typically wake up thinking about research problems, and so getting prioritization. The PHI privacy concerns, you know, I've had a number of conversations with the IRB, always have conversations with the IRB and the Privacy Office before we sort of start one of these big endeavors where we think, hey, we think we've got a paradigm shift. We've got some disruptive technology here to do something. But there's a number of reasons that it's hard. But, you know, honestly, I had another one of those kicking the rocks on the way from my office the third time. I was in one of those meetings with my boss, and he says, why is this so hard? And I start hand-wringing and telling him all those reasons, and then I think, good grief, this guy's like my boss, and I keep telling him it's hard. And part of the reason I was telling him it's hard is because, you know, I try to build REDCap for everyone. And then I realized by this time, hey, I actually own that big data space. And I own the little data space here. So I ought to be able to at least solve this at Vanderbilt. The longer we got into it with Vanderbilt, the more we realized, hey, this can be generalized. And the big moment of being able to do more was when Vanderbilt decided to go with Epic a few years ago. We created this collaboratory with the Epic engineers. We have some access to their engineers. They don't build a lot for us, but they've been very helpful in sort of helping us figure out the black box and the machinery within Epic that we needed to sort of point to. We built this technology on if you're an informatician, or maybe even if you're not and you hang out with them, you know that this term FHIR, Smart on Fire, where FHIR is the FHIR. We built it on sort of the standard du jour. The reason we wanted to build it on that standard is because all of the vendors seem to be lining up around building FHIR services. So the idea being, if I can create a module in REDCap that talks to the EHR, and if I can build it in Epic using FHIR, it ought to work in Cerner in FHIR as well. Anybody that sort of levels the playing ground. We've started with Epic because we are Epic, but we've already got some folks in Cerner looking towards using it and sort of kicking the tires on it. This is a REDCap back-end screen. This is the module in REDCap that you at Maryland or we at Vanderbilt, can sort of click on and enable or leave it disabled. It's some setup parameters, having the Epic the Epic interface talk to the REDCap interface behind the scenes, and you can imagine there's a lot of technical handshaking that needs to happen there. But we've generalized it. So I'm going to skip a lot of the details on the conversations that need to be had with the IRB and the Health IT group. Yeah, to get this socialized and sort of skip to the point where, okay, that module is turned on and we have connectivity to Epic. Then you get into that mapping and transformation stuff. So on these two screens, I'm actually showing REDCap screens here. One of them is pick me the data elements in Epic or Cerner that you're interested in. You see we can pull in demographics, conditions, medications, vitals, and labs. There's a bunch more stuff coming as they release new FHIR services, but and as they come, we'll sort of map those in as well. But you pick what you want from Epic, and then you go over to the second screen there and say, okay, point this towards this REDCap field. It's real easy if it's one-to-one like demographics. A little harder if it's temporal. You have to sort of set also sort of a date where you're wanting to look for data around. And if you think you might pull in multiple values, then would you like us to highlight as you're adjudicating this? Would you like us to highlight the high level or the low level or the one closest to that date to again sort of simplify the review process? Epic is really squirrely about letting people use their screens. So I had to blue out all of the Epic stuff, but pretend there's really some Epic screens. The only one I left in was that REDCap button because I figure I own that one. But pretend it's your Epic install and I'm a provider logged in. What's really kind of cool about this is with clicking that button, we now know the provider and we know the patient in context. And this tool that we built, this module that we built, can actually bring REDCap into Epic with you. It knows the patient. It knows from the provider, it knows which projects to show you. And it also knows the patient. And with that patient information, it knows whether they're already on this study or they're not on this study already. You see in this particular Healthier Family study, the patient's already on there. If not, there would be a green button that said, would you like to add that patient there? And if you did, then that registration would happen and we'd start that data flowing that we had mapped in the screen earlier. This is what the adjudication screen looks like for sort of that one-to-one data. This is what the adjudication looks like in a temporal data pull where we've got multiple values that need to be reviewed. This would be kind of like the equivalent of what a research coordinator would do in a chart review, clicking several different screens in Epic. It's just kind of pulled in for you. So that is up and running. It's live at Vanderbilt. Honestly, the technical stuff took about this much effort, and the health IT prioritization and then later the legal agreements to share it took this, but it's up and running. We've got it up and running at least at one other academic institution, UT Southwestern, and by the end of next week, I think we're going to be in the App Orchard, which I think is going to help us socialize this a lot more and make it a lot easier for the health IT groups to jump on board with. We've created the methods that I described to you in sort of that are useful for a proactive clinical study or trial where we kind of we know the sequence of events. We're also working on that number 2 bucket of work right now, which would be more or less a data mart. So I don't want to sort of map these to individual research fields that are already in REDCap. I just want to tell you what I want. I want to give you a patient list and a date range, and I want you to be able to go grab that for me and put it in a secure REDCap database. That's what we're working on now. Technically, it works. The IRB hasn't signed off on it, though, and I think there's some things that we can put in place in terms of regulatory workflow that will make life a lot better for everyone. So it works, and we can sort of release it for individual studies, but that'll be the next sort of big thing that we put in for everyone to take advantage of if you're using this EPIC module. And then third, we think that there's a lot of good folks at a lot of institutions that are already using REDCap surveys in sort of MyChart, the patient portal. But some of those methods are clunky, according to the EPIC folks, and they're saying, hey, if you'll focus on this, I bet we can declunk it. So that's, again, kind of one of those areas where the EPIC folks are not necessarily building a lot, but they're giving us some good recommendations based on what they're seeing. I'll skip this, except to tell you that the first site live was actually UT Southwestern because we were still standing up EPIC, and they launched it to support a clinical trial there called STRESS. We found that group when we started mapping one of our studies for on a trial called SMILE. We realized that the UT Southwestern folks were also doing SMILE. So we said, hey, if you're not doing this already, why don't we think about sharing those mappings with you, and let's see if our mappings that we developed for this REDCap at Vanderbilt actually apply when you drop it into this model at UT Southwestern. And while what I'm going to say is probably going to be a yawner for most people, I'll tell you in a minute why it's not. The good news is that worked. And again, most people that don't sort of deal in data and systems would think, well, of course it'll work. But the way that EPIC is implemented at every institution a little bit different, it was very encouraging that it worked. So that test has been done, and we're going to be doing a presentation at AMIA here in the fall about that. And then finally, we've started thinking about this in terms of efficiency of clinical trials, and we're doing a small study at Vanderbilt, but we're also looking at a bigger study within the PEDAL network, and I'm not sure if Maryland is in the PEDAL network. But the details of the study are not that important. What is important is sort of recognizing the efficiency of if I can get local EPICs talking to local REDCaps. There's probably unlikely, in my experience, it's unlikely to think we're going to get local EPICs talking to other institutions' REDCap because of all the data privacy and the perceptions of all of that. But we're seeing people lining up saying, we want to be first on the local-to-local connection. So we think that's going to scratch an itch that's really important. If you then sort of take the fact that the REDCap is good at talking to other REDCap instances through API and web services, the model that I'm showing here becomes interesting. So local-to-local, and then then sort of push the data that are collected from the EHR up to the coordinating center. That's something that I'm writing into a lot of grants right now, and it seems to be getting some favorable response or reviews. If you're interested at Maryland, if your REDCap team is interested, let me know, and we'll whether or not you're in PEDAL or not. If you're interested in sort of being an early wave adopter on this, again, it's going to get a lot easier after next week. It's not going to be trivial. There's still the health IT discussions and the privacy discussions in the IRB. But the technical pieces of it are going to get a lot easier next week when we drop this into the App Orchard. And then finally, I want to end with just a few slides around some new technology we've been developing over the last few years, and that's recognizing that mobile apps, so patient-centered apps. REDCap's really good for coordinators. It's okay for research subjects in terms of getting data from them in surveys, but it really wasn't meant to live with a patient or a participant for a long period of time. It's meant for sort of injections of let's get this data now. We recognize that a lot of people at Vanderbilt were asking us about smartphone apps. I recognize that after building one of those and it taking 6 months and $30,000 that this is not going to scale. We realize that, hey, that sounds a lot like the early REDCap study. If we can figure out a way to do this at scale and make it available to everyone without having to program, then we can, this is disruptive. So we set about creating a platform First in the iOS, and later this month we should be releasing any day now in Android as well, where we have this new platform called MyCap. MyCap is it really is sort of designed to you consent the patient, you send them home with this app, and it's sort of calendar based and task based, and it's very useful for data collection as well as information dissemination to participants. Again, it's like REDCap in that it doesn't take a programmer to build it. It actually pairs well with REDCap. You build it in the REDCap environment, and the data come back to live in REDCap. So we get to take advantage of all of the data management pieces of REDCap that already exist. It does. Here's a screen on joining a study. Scanning a QR ties it to an institution, a project, and a person. So then it's your application running for you and your project in your institution. Has security built in, of course, all the encryption at rest stuff. Has the ability to do notifications. Has the ability to be customized with logos and that sort of thing. And then it does things like surveys extremely well. And again, remember we're coming out of REDCap here that does a lot of survey work. So you just sort of create your survey in REDCap. You tell it, I want to consume this in MyCap, and it works the way you would expect a survey to work, even with simple branching logic. Doesn't do quite as complex branching logic as REDCap, but it does some. When you've completed a task, then it tells you you've completed your task, and you can kind of see the screen here. The other thing that it does that's kind of cool, though, is we can consume these research kit apps. So really taking advantage of the smartphone. On Thursday, every other Thursday, I want you to tell them that we want them to take this fitness test. So it tells you to stand up and go walk 50 meters this way and 50 meters this way, and then sit down. So those have to be programmed. But we can consume those, and many of them have been programmed already. We can just consume those with this, again, without programming. So that's where we're at with MyCap. We have launched it out to the consortium. We are using it with multiple studies and trials at Vanderbilt. And if you're interested, we're about to create sort of this portfolio of demonstration projects. But right now we have sort of an Easter egg. If you want to go to projectmycap.org, and then you do that little demo. Then at the bottom you'll get an opportunity to sort of sign up, and it'll give you a QR code, and you can point at it and pretend you're in that study just to kick the tires. So I'm going to skip this next piece because of time, but we've done a lot of work recently in e-consent. And again, this one has been almost a surprise to me. I had to hear this one 10 times before I realized hey, this is not just a REDCap survey turned for another purpose. We built a lot of policy and procedures into it. We built some functionality. And again, going back to that community of volunteers, the best demonstration on that was created by a group at UW. And if you want to learn more about it, then that's a great place, or you can just search e-consent and REDCap in Google and it'll come up. So again, moving from boredom and what's in it for me to actually interest from the research community. It's all about awareness, access to tools that people need. So the last slide I have is just sort of recognizing the practicing what we preach at Vanderbilt in terms of the promotion. Everybody at REDCap probably knows a little bit about REDCap. At Vanderbilt knows a little bit about REDCap, but again, we're developing all this stuff all the time. So this is a screenshot of an agenda for our annual REDCap Day, where we ask people to come into a room like this if they want and just kind of hear about the new stuff. That's it. Thank you, and I'm happy to take a question or two or take some afterwards.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. Incredible advances and breakthroughs.
Thanks.
Fantastic work.
I have a question about data quality. So you mentioned how squirrely Epic is. And so in our case here, we get different representations of the same thing, which may extract differently and need to be fixed. And then we also record some of our quality interventions, and then we have human error. Right. And all this stuff has to be fixed before it can be analyzed. And what step do you go through improving the quality of the data to fix these kinds of issues?
So the short answer is we don't do much. We focus on trying to bring the data to you. And even in the even an easier task than that would be, or a question might be, what do you do to help analyze the data? And we made a decision long ago that, our Stata, there are good packages out there to analyze the data, so if we can just figure out how to manage the data, in this case from the Epic piece, if we can just figure out how to bring it to you, then at least you're ready to export it and do those operations. It's a great question, and it's one we've had at Vanderbilt from time to time. Flipping over to the big data side of things, there are some things that we do there, like I think we have a BMI fixer, where we don't throw away the raw data, but we have sort of a BMI star, where some of our algorithms for cleaning are applied, and we sort of add that on. But it's a much more complex problem than just one variable, and it gets into once you clean it, how do you feed it back? And feeding it all the way upstream to the medical record is infeasible, but because of it's the legal medical record. But how do you sort of promote this awareness that this chunk of it is cleaned by this group over here for this purpose, and socialize that? It's a hard problem, and I will say that we don't have that one solved. Although I was talking to a colleague here this morning that's thinking about that. Yes?
Jeff?
So what happens to things like a synthetic derivative when you migrate DHRs?
Yeah.
Does time stop, or do you?
Yeah, it's a good question. It did. So a number of things happened. One is we did decide time has to stop. So we stopped feeding it, on a daily or a weekly basis for a while. We also recognized that we wanted to change the back-end data model. So one of my points to consider was don't get too married on the perfect is the enemy of good for a data model or an architecture, because you may want to change those. I think as long as you have good feel for your data and you can sort of pivot, you can sort of rewrite the front end to talk to a different data model on the back end. We decided about the time that we were going to Epic that we would restructure the whole back end of our system to map to a standard called OMOP. And again, I'll spare you the details of what that is and why. You may know. But the reason we did that was for two reasons. One was we knew some guys at UC Irvine that had already taken data out of Epic, the Clarity stores, and figure out how to do that transformation to OMOP. So we were theoretically going to take advantage of work that was already done there. But the other one was we were starting to build some of those All of Us tools, and we decided as a program, well, that's going to be OMOP. And so if we ever want to eat our own cooking here with the tools that we're building on top, then it's a good thing to sort of switch to OMOP. So we did the stop. We did a whole lot of meetings with a whole lot of teams that were dedicated and were committed to helping us continue the SD. But it was a difficult lift. And in fact, we went live in November of 2016, and we flipped the switch on the refreshed SD in February. So it took 3 months to kind of, even with all that prior planning, to get all of the data pipes flowing again.
So Paul, like in Nashville, our VA is about 90 feet away.
Yeah.
Have you had success getting RedCap into the Nashville VA?
Yes and no. So we, I realized a long time ago, much like your data people have, that it's dealing with University of Maryland data and dealing with VA data, it's a whole other ballgame. Even when you're doing government projects, so we do a lot of CDC work, which requires FSMA, but it's different in the VA. So we realized, if we're ever going to help the researchers in the VA, we're going to have to go inside the VA. So we did have some success at getting RedCap installed in the local VA. But the problem with the local VA there, and I think everywhere, is the IT support is just not the same. And so it's a heavier lift. So what we then did was through the CTSA community, we got some collaborators at the University of Illinois, and they were in the VA. So we had it installed now in the Vinci and then the I can't remember the VA acronyms, but there is a central model, centrally hosted REDCap within the VA system. So anytime I get requests from Vanderbilt folks, I just say you should go use that instance rather than trying to do the local.
Is that the Heinz VA?
Yeah,
Do you think?
yeah, that's right. That's right.
Any other questions, comments? Dr. Edelman.
Last question. Why do you call it red cap?
So it's a good question. Originally it was something else, and I called it that for about a year, and then I did a Google search one day and realized I'm going to get sued because somebody already has that name. Then I had to pick something, and it was just it stands for Research Electronic Data Capture. But we had to choose something that was catchy, and honestly, it was a whole bunch of commuting in and out of Vanderbilt with a biostatistician friend of mine, where we would pitch them and wear them around for a few days and get tired of them, and that's the one that stuck.
Make informatics great again.
What's it? Yeah, that's it. No. Yeah. Well, thank you very much.